What's up, Wizards? It's Dev and Julie. We put the G in Mtg. We like that magic stuff. And we got more Kaldheim previews for you today. And today there were a lot of previews. I don't know if you noticed, but there are a ton of cards to talk about. So we got to go ahead and get to it. Now, for the last couple of videos, I've been cutting out a lot of the lower rarity stuff, but there were actually a lot of commons and uncommons today that I think are at least worth pointing out, like Dwarven Reinforcements, Fearless Liberator, and Vault Robber. All of these are cards for a Dwarves deck, whether it's standard, historic, or more likely, at this point, just limited. But Dwarven Reinforcements looks kind of cool. It's 4 mana, 3 and a red for a sorcery. Create 2/2/1 red dwarf berserker creature tokens. You can foretell this for 1 and a red. So I don't love this in standard. Obviously, it's a bit expensive, even with the foretell. But at the same time, where I do like this is where you expect a sweeper from your opponent. You don't want to walk into it, but you still want a good way of spending your mana. So maybe you foretell this on your turn. If your opponent does hit the Shadow of the Sky or whatever other sweeper they're looking at, then you can just pay 2 mana on your next turn and get a board. You know, two power creatures isn't too shabby, I guess. So I guess it's not terrible looking in the Dwarves deck, and I do kind of like it in Limited, but it probably doesn't actually go anywhere in Constructed. So let's look at Fearless Liberator, another card that I don't think has many Constructed applications, but in Limited this looks pretty decent because you might play it on stats alone. It's a 2 mana 2/1 Dwarf Berserker with Boast, 2 and a red. And if you pay that Boast cost, you get a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker creature token. So this dude is able to create more dudes, and that's pretty decent in sealed, especially if your opponent's slow to start or they have mana issues or they just don't play up enough creatures in their kind of control-based deck. Then this thing can create a creature or two, even, maybe possibly more. A 2 mana 2/1 that puts other creatures into play maybe is a really good deal, but I've talked way too much about this card. Let's move on to Vault Robber. This is 1 and a red for a 1/3 Dwarf Rogue. You can pay 1 and tap it and exile a creature from your graveyard to create a treasure token. So again, I kind of like this in Limited, even though that's probably where it has the least applications, because it's a very specific card, you know? You probably want to play this in Standard or Historic Dwarves. If you're really soft on the 2-drop slot, and we're not. I mean, we already saw a 2-drop Legend in this set that we have to play, plus we have 7 Dwarves. If you want to play that card, you probably should. So your 2-drop slot is looking pretty stacked already. But if you're all in on the treasure theme, which you might be, then this card looks really, really good. You know, it's kind of red ramp, although you're not going to be able to use it all the time. Obviously, you probably want to have a fair number of like 1 and 2 drops that are very likely to die. Maybe some sort of Aristocrats theme. You could use this as ramp, but it costs 1 to use the ability, so you have to kind of wait until the next turn for this to truly be ramp. And again, you have to have a creature in your yard in the first place. So it's very situational, but very situational red ramp that doesn't die to stomp or shock or whatever. It looks pretty okay to me. And for what it's worth, we also saw reprints of Revitalize and Strategic Planning, and we got one of my favorite uncommons of the day, Usher of the Fallen. This is just 1 white mana for a 2/1 Spirit Warrior with Boast, 1 and a white, and that creates a 1/1 white Human Warrior creature token. So this is everything the Warriors deck needed, you know. This is, first of all, everything White Weenies needed too, by the way. We already had Venerable Knight in Standard, but now we have 2 Savannah Lions in Standard, so I think White Weenie might be really, really happy about getting a card like this, especially in a format with like Glorious Anthem, you know. So we're looking pretty decent on White Weenie end, but at the same time, Warriors really needed a 2-power 1-drop, and it just didn't really have that. It didn't really have a whole lot of good 1-drops, period, but this is a great 1-drop. I mean, it's a Savannah Lions with incredible value. Savannah Lions don't even really have to have too much upside in order to be playable, and this has way more upside than, say, Venerable Knight, especially outside of a Knight's deck. So really like this card. Again, I think it's easily one of the strongest uncommons, not only of the day, but possibly from the set. This has implications in multiple decks, and will easily find a home in Standard somewhere. Let's pull that Uncommons and Commons train into the station by looking at some of these activated ability lands that we got a bunch of today. They dropped a whole batch of these, and some of them are much better than others, but I want to start with Knotwood Slumbermound and Skemfar Elderhall. Now, Slumbermound, these are all a mouthful, by the way. Slumbermound comes into play tapped, and it taps for a red. Or you can pay 3, a red, 2 green, and tap it and sack it. So altogether, that is 7 mana you have to have available to you, counting Slumbermound itself. Destroy target land. Create a 4/4 green troll warrior creature token with trample. So a land that's sacrificed to create a 4/4 and just randomly bust a land on its way out isn't too bad, but I don't think it's the best of these either. Skemfar Elderhall enters the battlefield tapped and creates a green when you tap it. Or you can pay 2, 2 black, a green, tap it and sack it, and have up to 1 target creature you don't control get -2/-2 until end of turn. Create 2 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens. Make this happen only when you could do a sorcery, which that line of text is not on all of these, you know. Like on Slumbermound, it's pretty cool. You can make a 4/4 untapped at instant speed, right? But you can't really do the same thing here. I do think this is still very expensive. I mean, you need a total of 6 mana available to you to be able to just give a creature -2/-2. It's cool that you can create a couple of L's off of this. I can see a lot of value potentially in the late game, especially in a format like Sealed, which goes kind of late anyway. But in Standard, I imagine that for this much mana, you're going to often have better plays than this. But if you blank for the turn, this seems like it's going to be really good if you have the mana to sink into it, and I always love cards like that. But ultimately, I think there are way better versions of this, of this cycle that we got to see today. Like, we got to see Gates of Istfell. I think this is one of the best ones. This enters the battlefield tapped and creates a white mana when you tap it. Or you can pay 2, a white, 2 blue, tap it and sack it to gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. That's the cool part of it, kind of a memorial to genius that also gains you life. But it's in a very control-oriented color combination, which is just more able to stall the game out until it's able to use this effect, right? But maybe Control just has better things to spend its mana on, like Castle Vantress or something. But there are definitely going to be turns where your opponent doesn't really do much of anything because they blank, and at the end of their turn, you can just sack this, gain a couple of life back, and more importantly, draw 2 cards. Try to get to a sweeper, counter, or whatever you want. So I really am excited about this one in like blue-white Control, but that doesn't mean that all of the best of these are strictly control-oriented, right? Like, we also saw Axguard Armory today, and I really like this. It ETB's tapped, it taps for a white, and you can pay 1, 2 white, a red, or 2 red and a white, and tap it and sack it to search your library for an aura card and or an equipment card, reveal them and put it into your hand, shuffle your library. So you can get an aura and an equipment with this. You can go get an All the Glitters and an Embercleave or something. And that seems like really good. You can go get a Maul of the Skyclaves and whatever aura you want, Sentinel's Eyes or something. I'm not really sure what you're into, but either way, this looks really, really good, again, in the Red-White Warriors deck that plays a ton of equipments, and that deck's going to run out of cards relatively quickly, right? So, like, on turn 5, when you can actually activate this, it might be worth its weight, get you that Embercleave set up for turn 6 at the absolute earliest, or latest, I mean to say. So, I really like Armory, too. This is a land, so it's like 0 opportunity cost to play this, aside from the fact that it comes into play tapped, which could be a bit of a problem, but that just takes you off of, like, maybe you duck a Castle Ardenvale for 1 or 2 of these. And honestly, I've played a lot of Red-White Warriors, and you very rarely actually activate Castle Ardenvale. This, much more effect on the game when you do activate it. So I really like this card, tutoring for 2 different things for almost 0 opportunity cost in deck building is unbelievable. So, and especially I should point out that this is one of the ones that costs like the least to actually activate, and that's got to count for something too. But let's look at Carfell Port next. We did get a bunch of these, I've told you. This one enters the battlefield tapped and adds blue to your mana pool when you tap it. You can pay 3, a blue, 2 black, and tap it and sacrifice it to mill 4 cards, and then return a creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped at instant speed. That's really, really cool in, again, like a control-oriented deck that's able to, first of all, it mills for you, so you might mill something cool into your yard, but, if you have a way to discard stuff to, like, Teferi Time Raveler or the million other discard effects in Standard, you just, like, bin a huge creature, and then later on in the game, once you've got control of the board state, your opponent says go, you're not going to have to counter any spells, or at least sorcery speed spells that turn, then Boom! I mean, it costs 7 mana in total, but once you're able to do that, boom, just bring a creature back from the graveyard to the battlefield. And suddenly, you're looking pretty good, especially if you've got like a huge ETB on that creature or something. So I really, really like this. Even though it costs like a ton of mana, I still like reanimation at instant speed at 0 opportunity costs. So love it. Absolutely love it. But I'll move on to the last of these that we saw today. I'm trying to blaze through these. I have a lot more to say about them than I'm leading you to believe at this point, but some of them are so good, like, what else could you possibly say about them? This card's good. Surtland Frozen Flame is a land that enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for a red. You can pay 2, a blue, 2 red, tap it and sacrifice it. Or, excuse me, it's 2 blue and a red. Tap it and sacrifice it. To scry 2, and then Surtland Frozen Flame deals 2 damage to each creature. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So, again, we have a sorcery speed restriction on this duder right here, which kind of sucks, but at least it's kind of a sweeper on a land, which is good. It's not bad, you know. You also get to scry, so you just kind of throw a scry on top of it. You know, your next card might be pretty decent, and you get to blow up a board full of small, like, tokens or something. So, again, very little opportunity cost to playing effectively another sweeper in your deck. So this will probably see some amount of play too. All of these are extraordinarily overcosted for the effect that they're giving you, except in 1 or 2 occasions. But for the most part, all of these seem like they cost a ton of mana. But if the game goes long, you'll be very glad you included this in your mana base instead of like a mountain. Let's get to the big stuff from today, starting with Skemfar Avenger. This is just 1 and a black for a 3/1 Elf Berserker. And whenever another non-token Elf or Berserker you control dies, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So it's a Midnight Reaper, but just for Elves, and Berserkers, I guess. But mostly I'm excited about the Elves clause on this. And it costs 1 less than Midnight Reaper. That's so good. That's a good card, man. That's it. Does it say another on it? Let me double check it. Yeah, it sucks that it's whenever another. So when this dies, you don't get to draw a card. So in that way, it's worse than Midnight Reaper too. But for just a couple of mana, this is like a must-kill thing that's going to see play in every drow, you know, every green-black Elves Commander deck from now until the end of time. But this probably has some amount of standard playability in like an Elvish Aristocrats type thing. It doesn't even have to be Aristocrats, right? If you're playing Elves, you're going to have like 45 Elves on the battlefield at any given time. So as long as this doesn't kill you with its own ability, like drawing a card for each one of those elves that dies is unbelievable. So big fan of this card. I think it's actually like subtly one of the best cards from the day. But I also want to look at Ascendant Spirit. This is just 1 blue mana for a 1/1 snow spirit that I feel like it should fly. It's not flying in the art, but it doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. You can pay 2 snow. Ascendant Spirit becomes a Spirit Warrior with base power and toughness 2/3. If you pay 3 snow, if Ascendant Spirit is a warrior, so you have to level it up first. That's what this card's reminiscent of. If Ascendant Spirit is a warrior, put a flying counter on it. There it is. And it becomes a Spirit Warrior Angel with base power and toughness 4/4. And if you put 4 snow into it, if Ascendant Spirit is an angel, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and it gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Despite the fact that playing the card in the first place is sorcery speed, this might actually find a home in like modern or more likely historic spirits because it's got the right creature type and it doesn't cost a whole lot of mana. You can cast this on your turn and still hold up mana for counters, removal, or other instant speed. You know, spirits, other spirits that actually do have flash. So I really like the look of this card. If your opponent doesn't give you anything better to do with your mana during a given turn, you can just say end of your turn, level this up or whatever, and eventually after you've pumped 10 freaking mana into it, you'll have a 6/6 flyer that draws you a card. You know, when it hits. So that's all really good for the initial cost of 1 mana. I really like, you know, 1-drops and 2-drops that have relevance much later on in the game, and this is the epitome of that. I like this card. But let's look at Tundra Fumarole real quick. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 red for a snow sorcery that deals 4 damage to a creature or a planeswalker. You add a colorless mana for each snow spent to cast this spell. Until end of turn, you don't lose mana as steps and phases end. So this is unbelievable, to my mind, at least. I've seen a lot of people kind of ho-humming at this, but the Spikes know what's up. I've seen a lot of kind of equal numbers of people saying that this is slightly, maybe a little bit broken. It can be almost completely free on turn 3 if you have a colorless thing that costs 3 mana to cast. And in like the big red decks that play a lot of colorless spells because they play Ugin and stuff, then like this could be really good. It can play like a Crystalline Giant or a Mana Rock, like a Skyclave Relic or something on turn 3. On turn 2, or on turn 3, I mean to say again, it can just like, you can cast the spell and then activate like a Maze Mind Tome. And that seems pretty good too. So there's just other stuff, even if you don't have 3 total mana or whatever to spend on your turn 3 after you cast this, you can still do stuff like cast Tome or activate Tome or, again, all kinds of stuff. Just play 2 mana colorless things and you're still double spelling on that turn while affecting the board state. So I think this card's actually really good in the big red decks, and big red might actually, dare I say, be a real thing after this set comes out. Not just because of this card, but because of some other stuff. But this card does go a long way in making big red playable. I really think so. Because an almost or even completely free, sometimes, removal spell is just game-changing for any format. So I know some people are kind of skipping over this card and just calling it a 3-mana removal spell, but it is much, much more than that. Moving on, here's Reidane, God of Justice, and Reidane Shield. Now, a lot of people are freaking out entirely about this card, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was a lot of people's best card of the day, but it's fine. It's just a fine card to me. This is a 2 and a white for a 2/3 legendary god with flying and vigilance. Snow lands that your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Opponents have to pay 2 more to cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or more. And then the Reidane Shield half of it is, whenever a source that an opponent controls deals damage to you or a permanent you control, it deals -1 of the damage instead. Whenever you or a permanent you control is targeted by a spell or an ability an opponent controls, the opponent may pay 1. If they don't, the spell or ability is countered. So this card just taxes and taxes, and the taxes never stop with either half of this card. I do like that this is kind of a check on Snowlands, making them not entirely better. There's a situation that we've seen in standards of the past where Snowlands are just strictly better than basics in a lot of situations, meaning that even if your deck isn't snow, you play Snowlands as kind of a bluff. And yes, I meant that pun there entirely. You play Snowlands as a bluff. This makes it to where maybe decks won't do that. They'll pull back on that because there actually is kind of a real downside in the format to playing Snowlands. Problem is, this card has to be playable for that to be the case, and I'm not really sure where this goes, to be honest. I'm not sure if this is a sideboard card or what, but it does do stuff against just about every kind of deck. The front half, the creature half, does stuff against control decks and Ugin decks and Shark Typhoon and stuff like that. Decks that play a lot of Planeswalkers, just a lot of expensive spells, Decks that want to play the Great Hinge, this will take them a turn or 2 off of that. So I really like that about the front half, and the stats are at least okay. On the back half, I'm a little bit less impressed, I gotta say. But it does keep your opponents from targeting with stuff, as often at least. And it does, kind of negate small creatures, tokens and fervent champions and whatnot. So neither half of the card is terrible. I'm just not as impressed by both halves together as I think a lot of people are. And I will be the first person to tell you that versatility is key and versatility makes for a strong card. But in this case, I'm just not really sure what niche this fills in Standard or where it goes. And there's a lot of cards like that in this set that I've already called good, but this is one of those that's just a little bit situational, and maybe it's just going to be so annoying to play against that it's a strong card in and of itself, and it just makes like a mono-white mid-range archetype playable, again, by itself. But I find that a kind of a tough pill to swallow. This card will have to prove itself to me, but I'm not saying the card is bad. Let me put it that way. I kind of want to withhold judgment on this one because I think it's a pretty complex moving machine that could be really, really good in Standard, or it could just be a brick. I'm still not really sure about this one, y'all. But up next, let's look at In Search of Greatness. This is 2 green for an enchantment, just 2 green mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with mana cost equal to 1 plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying that spell's mana cost. If you don't do that, scry 1. So sorry for not coming back on screen for this talk that we're having, because I think this might be one of the most talked about or impactful cards of the day, or perhaps maybe one of the biggest busts of the day. But there's a lot of text on this card that needs to be translated, so I'd much rather have the entire card on screen than like my face covering 2/3 of the screen and the translation being so small you can't read it. Now, and the translation is very important because there's a lot of important qualifiers on this card. It's because, again, this ability that triggers does not count in Search of Greatness itself. So you don't just get a free 3-drop on 3. That would make the card absolutely bonkers. I think that one word being inserted into this card makes it much, much worse while still being a decent card. You know, if you play a 3-drop on turn 3, for instance, now you might not get anything for free on turn 3. After you play this card, you might not. They might obliterate your 1-drop. You didn't get one in the first place. You don't get anything, but you still get to scry. You get to scry before your draw step, which is worth something, I'd say. And then on turn 3, maybe you play your Lovestruck Beast. And that means that you now have a Questing Beast and 4 open mana, which is good. That means that you can just like Great Henge that turn because you have a Lovestruck Beast out. You can Great Henge for 4 mana that turn and get a free Questing Beast. That seems like a really, really good play line, but obviously there's some things holding the card back. It is not a very good top deck if you get it later on in the game. You have to have like a perfect curve in your opening hand most of the time, plus this card, to really make it work. And this might just be like a little Fires of Invention that only costs 2 mana, at which point it's easily the best card in the set. But a lot of things have to go right in order to make this engine actually purr. So I'm not like quite ready to call it ridiculous, but I do say the card is at the very least dangerous, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was a bridge too far. But the card does have a few restrictions on it that make it not so great and kind of clunky and a little slow to start, so maybe that's the saving grace here, but it just costs 2 mana. It's a turn 2 play. It's crazy. It could be maybe the most bonkers card we've seen so far in the set, or it could be a total bust. But to my mind, the best card of the day, or at least the card that I can most assuredly know for a fact is a good Magic card, is Cosima, God of the Voyage, and the Omen Keel. The Omen Keel is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 3/3 legendary vehicle that crews for 1 power. Whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play lands from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. And then Cosima herself is a legendary god. It's a 3 mana 2/4, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile Cosima. If you do, it gains whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If Cosima is exiled, you may put a Voyage counter on Cosima. If you don't, return Cosima to the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it and draw X cards, where X is the number of Voyage counters on Cosima. Okay, so first of all, I just want to, and I don't want to spend too much time doing this, I already have, but I just want to say this might actually be my personal favorite, like, flavor win of all time. I mean, I've been playing Magic for like 25 years, guys. And I think they completely nailed the flavor on this. The ship half of it gets you lands because it's out voyaging and finding new lands and stuff. I think that's cool. And then the creature half of it goes out and voyages and gains power and experience and knowledge represented in the form of drawing cards when it comes back. That is such perfect flavor, but in pursuit of perfect flavor, I think they've made a really, really good Magic card on both halves. A 2 mana 3/3 vehicle that crews for just 1 power is pretty good, you know, survives wraths and sorcery speed, kill effects and stuff like that. And it just gets you lands. It's not even whenever it hits for combat damage. It's whenever a vehicle you control, which makes it just that much better. Just that like 2 or 3% better. So if you have more than just this vehicle in your deck, it instantly becomes like a Lord effect in a way. But, you know, being able to just like pick lands off the top of your opponent's library, especially if they're having mana trouble at the time, seems really, really good, especially in decks that want to trigger landfall and stuff. You're not getting guaranteed landfall triggers, but you're still maybe getting some landfall triggers, you know, some extra lands off your opponent's deck. And honestly, being able to consistently play a land every turn is a very important part of Magic. So I just like the vehicle half, even though I don't think that it's incredibly broken or anything. I do think, however, that the creature half is very, very, very good. Now, the worst part about the creature half is that it has to stay in play for a turn in order for you to exile it. And even then, you've exiled it. Like, is it really worth paying 3 mana on turn 3 just to exile this on turn 4? Well, Might be. In your control deck, right? I mean, you don't have to do it on turn 3. You can play this on like turn 5 or 6 and still have mana to hold up for a counter spell or something. And then as the game goes on, you're playing lands pretty consistently in your control deck. You played 26, 27, 28 of them anyway. You're drawing into them fairly consistently with draw spells and stuff. So you're probably able to put a counter on this just about every turn, or at least every other turn at the absolute least, right? So eventually you can return this to play with like 4 +1/+1 counters on it and draw 4 cards when you're running low on cards. And that's not even really a Christmas land situation. All I'm really asking there is that the control deck control the board state for a few turns. Imagine like playing this on 3, exiling it on 4, playing your land, hitting Extinction Event, and then on turn 5 you can just play your land and unexile this or whatever. Like, it seems good, you know, draw a card or 2, have a 4-power guy right after you hit a sweeper, you know, whatever your opponent stabilized with, whatever your opponent answered your sweeper with. You now probably have a bigger creature, at least in terms of toughness, to, you know, take down or block the creature they played. Or, conversely, you just have the only creature on the board and you can start swinging in, you know. I like a lot about this. The longer you keep it out of play, the better it is. It's actually really good in multiples, which you don't get to say about many legends, but not only, just like all the other gods from the set, not only does this mitigate the legend rule by way of you being able to play either half of the card if you already have one in play, but if you have a Cosima exiled, you can just play another Cosima. You know, just play it onto the table. It's now a blocker, an attacker, whatever. You can exile that one on your next turn and bring back the other one. And then that one dies, you can bring back the one that you exiled second. There's a lot going on with this card, but I think in any situation where it draws you 2 cards and has 4 power, and effectively on the turn that it comes into play, it comes into play for free. You know, like when you unexile this, you have all of your mana open to you, and you draw a bunch of cards, and you get like a 3, 4, 5, 6 power creature, depending on how long it's been in exile. So I think this is unbelievable in a lot of ways. I hate that it has to stay out for a turn. I hate that it costs 3 mana, sorcery speed. All of that is the suck. But this is one of those cards that if you ever actually do get a chance to exile it and keep it out for a few turns, you know, bring it back and it's just unbelievable. Especially depending on what you've been able to do with the board state in the couple of turns it was gone. If you set it up properly, the card is just bonkers in terms of like control finishers or even just refills for control decks. I love this thing, if you can't tell. And it's probably one of my favorite cards from the sets so far, bar none, just easily. But will it work? I don't know. It's entirely possible. I'm getting way too excited about this card. When I know the reasons it could be bad, they're the same reasons I think a lot of cards could be bad. You know, it doesn't do anything when it enters play. Not only does it not do anything when it enters play, but you're very likely to just exile it the next turn. So is that worth your 3 mana investment in your whole turn 3? Just to get your face stomped off by a questing beast when you say go? I'm not entirely sure that that's worth it, but I am obviously very excited about this one. And if a control deck can make it work, I think it's instantly one of the better control finishes in the entire format. And we got Shark Typhoon and Ugin in this format, but I still think this is really, really good. But that, so far at least today, is all of the Kaldheim previews that we got to see. So just let me know how you felt about all these. What's the best card of the day? Is In Search of Greatness broken? I think that's probably the biggest like talking point of the day. How do you feel about In Search of Greatness? Is it too much, or is it actually a stinker? Just let me know down there and how you feel about all the other cards. And while you're at it, like the video, sub to the channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You get more spoilers that way, and you'll get to see the decks and the top 10s and all that. When we finally do those, the set is almost fully spoiled. Plus my exclusive previews coming out on the 16th. I believe that is Saturday. It better be Saturday, because that's when I've got it scheduled. But my exclusive previews on the 16th. Make sure you sub for that. Hit the bell too. But aside from that, you can do all the usual stuff. You want to watch me play some Magic or possibly even other video games, go to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. We have a lot of fun there. It's shameless. You got to stop by and just check out the crew. But aside from that, if you really want to support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/SBMTG or hit the link in the description. $1 a month is all I really ask from you. You'll be supporting the channel a lot, and you'll get to vote on what decks and videos we do once Kaldheim drops. So I think it's a pretty good deal. But in any case, I'm done for this one. Just remember to let me know how you felt about the stuff, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.